Okay, it's a great pleasure to kick off this symposium on supervising the supervisors. And the broad title of my topic will be Pitching Responsible Science Matters. So I've got three goals to help supervisors. The first is I'm going to explain somewhat by way of background, but I think it turns out to be much more important than background when it's all said and done, the concept of responsible science, at least my view of what this concept is and why it's important. Secondly, I'll move on then to very briefly share with you the pitching research framework that I developed about 7 or 8 years ago. And I've been working hard to spread it worldwide since. I apologise to those of you that have been exposed to this before. I'll just give a flavour of it, and then I will bring the two together and actually make a case for why it's valuable for supervisors to have their students pitch responsible science to them. And then at the very end, and I'll probably run out of time, but I've made these slides available and I've asked Imran to share these amongst you, whoever's interested. There is a number of slides with helpful resources and opportunities, and right through the presentation, there are a number of links in the slides that you will find valuable as supervisors. So let me first go to goal 1. So I'm going to keep emphasizing my goal is to help supervisors, and I'll assume everyone watching are supervisors, although I understand some of you aren't. But I am talking to supervisors and trying to give you some general advice on how I think I can help you make your supervision experience a lot more successful than it otherwise might be. So I want to first of all talk about responsible science. And you might ask, well, what do I mean by science? You might even say, hey, I don't do science. I do finance, or I do accounting, or some other research. Well, for me, we're all scientists. We don't have to be physical scientists. We don't have to be hard scientists. We don't have to be lab scientists. We can very nicely and legitimately be social scientists. And so think of science as essentially, at least the way I view it, as research, as scholarly research. And it links very much to knowledge and knowledge creation. So when I talk of science and producing research, it's a creation of knowledge, and I really have in mind scholarly research. So as supervisors, you will have a very good idea of what I mean by scholarly research. But in order to help you, if you need to, in an early conversation with your students, convey this, let me share with you just one little snippet, and it comes from the Australian setting. The Australian Research Council have given, I believe, a very succinct and helpful view of what research is, and I'm sure you in your jurisdiction would have a research body that would also give you a similar statement. So it's about the creation of new knowledge and or the use of existing knowledge in a new and creative way so as to generate new concepts, methodologies, inventions and understandings. And it includes synthesis and analysis of previous research to the extent that it is new and creative. Now, there's a few things that are being reinforced and repeated here, which I think drive home the message. So newness and novelty is important. In red, there are 4 instances in that very short extract where new is mentioned. Knowledge is there twice, and creation, creative, is there 3 times. So to me, if I'm conveying to a student as a supervisor, I want to drive home the message that doing research is about creating new knowledge. So research, science, what is responsible science? what I would draw your attention to, and there are many sources available, very many legitimate and credible sources for giving us an insight into responsible science. But one I particularly like was put out there in 2017 by the so-called Community for Responsible Research in Business and Management. And at the bottom of this slide, there's a link. When you get these slides, if you're interested, you can click that link and go to their latest information. But they put forward a 2030 vision, which is now only 8 years away. And it's all about responsible science. And in this vision, they emphasize two elements: that the research that we do should be useful, and the research that we execute should create credible knowledge. Useful knowledge, credible knowledge. So they are two key pillars that I totally agree with, but I would actually add a third pillar, which I guess is implicit in what they're saying, but it deserves to have its own pillar. So credible research, relevant research, independent research. These are the three key pillars of what I view as responsible science. So when we think of and we talk to our students, and as supervisors, I believe we should try and impress upon them from a very early stage and regularly that they should aim or strive to create credible research, that is, reliable knowledge. They should, as much as possible, strive to create relevant research, that is, useful knowledge. And thirdly, they should aim and strive to create independent research, and that will give us unbiased knowledge. Now, it is true to say, I believe, that there is a tug of war in many ways in this landscape. And one of them that I draw attention to in this slide is between passion versus objectivity, or at least where passion can challenge objectivity. And I think in the context of responsible science, if as a supervisor, I'm communicating with a student, then I want to make it very clear that passion is good, provided it's focused on the question, on the research question. And I get very worried, I get very nervous, I get very concerned if the passion slips to be all about the outcome, because then, among other things, I'm worried that they won't be independent and that they will let the outcome drive the research. In the end, it won't be research. It will be fake. It will be challenged in terms of having fakeness about it. So passion about the question, be objective about the answer. Now, responsible science matters. And as a supervisor, I really urge you to drive this message home very early with our students, because I have a real concern that the shape of research, the research ecosystem, and where we have evolved to, for many reasons that I just do not have time to talk about here, leaves us in a state of crisis. I believe we are in a state of crisis, and I'll give you a few hints around what I believe that crisis relates to very shortly, but it broadly relates to responsible science. Now, on this slide, I give a few suggestions of what I think are hallmarks of responsible science. I won't go through the list, but it should be good science. It should be a true contest of ideas, and basically it should be reliable. So I've hinted that I think there's a crisis. Now, most of you as supervisors, you may think I'm crazy. There's no crisis. There's nothing to worry about. The way we do research is wonderful. Well, I don't believe so. And let me tell you 3 flavors of why there may be a crisis. Now, time prevents me from going into detail on any of these, but let me just pick off the first one: replication. Replication is important. And I think in our discipline, in our industry, the scholarly research industry, and us as supervisors, we've forgotten this. We've forgotten it to the extent that Supervisors will use the replication strategy with their students, but they will downgrade its importance, and we never share. There are really great replications that occur every day, and they are not shared. And this is valuable information for us and our students and as supervisors to guide them about how the world really works. Now, when you combine that with a view that there may be a publication bias, and I could talk about this for a long time, but think of the last time you read a study where there was insignificant results. It is so rare. Do you believe the body of literature that's published that tells you there are no insignificant results? To be honest, I don't. And we have to warn our students that there is a hidden element of very capably done research that never gets published that we should be aware of and we should think about. So what are the solutions? There are no easy solutions. And I'm not going to pretend I have many or any great solutions, but I'm going to give you a flavor of the direction that I think this needs to go. And it's going to require a degree of cultural change and a somewhat parallel cultural change that is embraced over time and naturally. We can't force this, but naturally by key stakeholders in the system. Now, who might be some of the key stakeholders? Well, the deans of our faculties might be key stakeholders. The editors of journals might be key stakeholders, and researchers themselves. Us as supervisors, we are researchers, but we're guiding the new breed of researchers, and they have a key place in this puzzle, but there are many other stakeholders as well. Now, in this slide, I'm suggesting that, well, maybe we could hope for some visionary action by a dean or by an editor or by a researcher. And the problem is, and it's quite perverse, I believe, that if you, as a loner, risk being seen as a visionary, you'll actually be seen as someone that has gone crazy and going against the flow of the system. For example, as an editor, Pacific Basin Finance Journal, I instituted a replication section, replication studies section in the journal beginning of 2019. And that's super risky because we've had it drummed into us since the time that we did our PhDs, the time that we were researchers, that publishing replications is a waste of time. It's a low effort, and why bother? And I recoil against that absolutely. We need to publish replications. We need to understand how reliable research is in our domain. So it serves a very important purpose for that, as well as a training ground for our students. But what have I done? I've risked, and I'm hoping the community will see that this is important for Pacific Basin Finance Journal, but there will be a group of so-called elite researchers that may be saying, Faff's a nut. Why is he publishing replications? And that if that view takes hold, then that could jeopardize the established reputation of the journal. But I think it is so important, that's a risk that I am willing to take. So possible actions by journal editors, publishers, and researchers are to take replications more seriously. For editors to actually state and put out there they will publish replications. Take Evo Welsh at the Critical Finance Review in the finance area. Now, Evo in this sense, I believe, is a trailblazer. Long before 2019, when I decided to go down this path with PBFJ, Evo was welcoming replications for his journal, and he still does. And this is important. We need more journals to do this because it's part of a bigger solution long term. Another part of the solution is inviting or embracing a pre-registration process. I don't have enough time to even scratch at the surface of what this is about, but what it's trying to do is to take off the table the presumption that statistical significance is a necessary condition for getting a paper published. That is absolutely bad. And a pre-registration process, while there's no silver bullets here, and this can be abused like any solution we come up with to improve the system, bad human behavior can find ways around it. But I firmly believe that having a pre-registration process, which gives rise to what you might call an in-principle accept, purely based on a plan of what the research is going to be before you've looked at the data, before you've done the analysis. And what you're trying to do is take off the table the feeling by the researchers they have to find statistically significant results. No, I want you to tell me what you believe are the results that explain how the world works in this field. That is important. That's what I'm after. And we are at Pacific Basin Finance Journal, under my leadership. We're going to head down this path and experiment, I guess, and test this out. I'm on the lookout to pre-register very good, sound plans where there's a good idea, a watertight method showing gold standard design, research design, and gold standard data, and a solid idea. These are the things I want to say. I will publish that as long as you follow a protocol that you've developed prior to executing the study. I also believe in systematic reviews as another arm of this, and this is something that I am embracing at Pacific Basin Finance Journal. This is not so easy to read, but it's just to show you that I made a declaration as editor of Pacific Basin Finance Journal to go down this path of responsible science. You can find that editorial in the Pacific Basin website if you're interested, or if you want me to point you to it offline, I can do that as well. Now, what can university leaders and deans do? Well, I've highlighted the one that I think is relevant to this talk, and that is research training. Hey, we're supervisors of HDR students. Research training is front and center of what we're trying to do, and capacity building. So we are part of that solution as long as those university leaders actually give us the resources and the encouragement to go down that path. Now, what can we do as research scholars? Well, we have to be careful. The system is still the system. And what I would like to encourage is everyone to just start thinking about how it might change and how we might, at the edges, change the way we view doing research. You can't upend everything, otherwise you'll be you'll fail because you're a visionary researcher and everyone thinks you're nuts. But I've highlighted things that I think we should do as researchers, that we should do as supervisors, and that we should start to encourage more with our students. So embrace front-end holistic planning. So force or require a plan of research as detailed as it can be prior to data collection, prior to analysis, prior to execution, and then follow through on that. And this does not mean you can't divert from your plans. What we then need to do is be honest, and when we write up our research, any diversion from plans is put under a different heading. We don't pretend we had the idea all along. We put it under the heading of essentially exploratory or ex post analysis. Now, the totem pole of the hierarchy of research would indicate that that type of research won't be seen quite as strongly as research that we had the idea all along, that we developed the, the theory, we had models and we had hypotheses before we did the analysis. But there is no shame in this context of being honest and pointing to what is somewhat exploratory. We still can learn from that. We need to be more honest about how we do that. We should encourage as supervisors, we should encourage our students to proactively pitch their research whenever the opportunity arises. And this will lead into goal 2 of my talk. And I would like to encourage researchers generally, supervisors and their students to voluntarily pre-register their research plans so that you have it as a record, public record as to what you plan to do, and it can be matched against what you actually did do. So where can I learn more about this, I hear you say? And I would point you to one of my SSRN papers. It's called Responsible Science Matters. It's easy to find on SSRN, but the link is here. If you get the slides, if you take a photo now, you could have the address. And there's also a video that I have recorded that goes into much more detail about responsible science. So let me now move to goal 2, and I'm going to skip over this pretty quickly. I normally give webinars on this for an hour and a half on pitching research, but I'm going to do it in a nutshell, and then I'm going to point you to where you can find out more. So I am going to start with one of my favorite cartoons, and it is relevant to what this is about. And I almost feel like, and I've talked about this cartoon so many times, but when I look at it, it's like I'm about to reveal a dark secret to you about my supervision, right? So you're supervisors, I'm talking to you about supervision, and now I'm going to reveal a dark secret. And the dark secret is when you are faced with a situation like this simple 3-cell cartoon. Thank you to phdcomics.com for doing a great service to academia by giving us a humorous way of looking at some real issues. And here's a real issue. So there I am. I'm the supervisor. I have had a beard in the past. I'm not so good on hair up on the top of my head. Occasionally I've worn glasses, lovely green vest. That's me. That's the supervisor. And I don't know how many of you might relate to someone like me in this cartoon. There's our student that we're supervising. We only see him in the very first cell, and it's just from behind. And essentially, this is the beginning of a meeting. I like 30-minute meetings, so I can imagine myself beginning of a 30-minute meeting. And the student's actually given me something before the meeting, which is a bonus. It often doesn't happen. But the problem is, as we see in cells 2 and especially in cell 3, look at the pile of papers. Okay, so this is a bit of a 20th century, maybe even 19th century theme here, or sort of way of displaying it, because we're not meant to print out paper anymore in the 21st century. But don't be too concerned about that. So the student asked the question right at the beginning, "Sir, did you read the draft I left on your desk?" And I replied, "I've looked at it." Now, the other 2 cells give us 2 very different interpretations of that 4-word phrase in the English language. I've looked at it. So the middle cell is what your student, the one that you are supervising, this is what they hope it means. And just ignore for the fact that you're saying this is amazing. That's like icing on the cake. What they really hope is you're looking at every page. You've read every paragraph. You've dwelled on every sentence, and even some words you've sat there and thought about it. How long would that take? Look at all the pages. That's going to take hours. Is that going to happen? So here's my dark secret. No. It's not going to happen. I don't have the time. I don't have the energy. I don't have the enthusiasm. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm a grumpy old man, but that's the dark secret. So I put it, and that's, we have a binary situation here, two extremes. One where it's read in detail. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think the other one happens either, the final cell. All I'm doing is turning my head to the side and I'm looking at it at a distance. How much have I taken in? Nothing. It's going to be a disaster. The meeting's going to be a disaster. As a supervisor, it's going to be a disaster. You can imagine, I can tell you, I can play it out for 5 seconds, what I'd be doing in the meeting. And basically, and you can't see it because of my background, but I'm waving pages around here because I'd be frantically trying to find something in the 25, 30 pages there that I can relate to in some way and comment on. And it just won't work. So both of these are extreme. The reality would be somewhere in between. But let's dwell on the final cell. It's labeled what it probably means. I've looked at it. If as researchers we do that, we're not doing a very good job. And you might say, well, and I, part of the problem is, well, we're time constrained. The students given us too much to read. So you could try and land it back on them, but that's slightly unfair because we probably gave them no guidance on how to give us a streamlined piece of information. So to me, there's three problems. The first is communication. The second's communicate. In fact, they're all communication. It's a communication breakdown. So the communication that we're after, we're the supervisors, we're the academic expert, and we want a communication to happen. Now, it's a two-way street and we have to help guide them. Well, I've got great news for you. I've got what I believe is a perfect tool to get this communication across. And you don't have 25 pages, you have 2 pages. And it's structured as I have here, where you say to your student, these are the things I want you to tell me about. You've got 1,000 words, that will be enough. When you're done, send me the 1,000 words. And trust me, if they do a half reasonable job, those 1,000 words will be gold. Because even if you have not read that material prior to the meeting, you can scan through it. You're the expert in the field. You can scan through it pretty quickly and you will have so much more than 30 minutes of things to discuss. It is a communication breakthrough for you. This is the tool. If you've not seen it before, if you've not tried it before, this is the biggest present that I've ever given you in your entire life. Well, I've given you no presents before, so it must be. This is my gift to you. And what are those items? Well, none of them are a surprise to you. But what this does is give you, in a nice, neat package, in groups that I think make a lot of sense, the first 4 items, the 4 big picture anchors: working title, basic research question, key papers, motivation puzzle. What I would, as a supervisor, what I would say to the student is, use these 4 to frame the bigger picture of your research. And with that, your supervisor will really appreciate it because they need to be informed of what you think that bigger picture is. And the rest of the pitch is then about your project. So you drill down. The next 3 items are very intentionally packaged together. These are the essential building blocks. And by and large, this is where the student is telling you, the supervisor, how they're going to go about doing their research that links to that bigger picture. The idea, well, that's a little, that's probably more what, but then the 2 how questions, data and tools. And as a package, you can make a call on what you like, what you don't like around that. And a lot of that call might be, as I mentioned earlier, how close are they to the gold standard in the field in terms of data tools? If they're not right at the gold standard, is there a good reason why they aren't? And are they sufficiently close that this is still a viable project? And there are a lot of constraints out there in different research settings where sometimes you just can't get to the gold standard, but you can make a case for still a legitimate and valuable piece of research to take place. So then we have the two key questions. So I'd be saying to my student, that's, you've given me the how. Now I want to know, well, in fact, the next three are why, are different flavors of why. The two key questions, tell me why it's new. What's new about it? What's the essential element of it that's new? And then so what? So being new is not the end of the story. You have to, I'd be saying to my student, I want you to create a project where it's not only new and novel, but that new and novel thing people actually care about. There's little point doing something new and novel where no one cares about it. And then the bottom line to all this is the contribution. And so we even at an early stage, we want our research HDRs, where they're supervisors, we want them to tell us as best they can where they think the contribution element lies. Now, there are other considerations that often come into play that won't be captured by any of the 10 items above. So one that I like to throw in here, but it's just an illustration, is, well, what's your target journal? Now, in fact, knowing what the realistic, not the aspirational, but the realistic set of target journals are, will allow us to calibrate some of our expectations around the answers to the items that are above the other considerations in this framework. So I like to think of a cocktail glass to reflect what I've just told you. So it's a 4, 3, 2, 1 plus 1 design. And what I like about the cocktail glass is it gives that wedge image. And really it is about, you've got 4 things to explain, 3 things, 2 things, and then it all comes down to the holy grail. What's the bottom line for your research? So if I were sort of advising my student, okay, and there'd be detailed advice, but broad advice about how to attack this problem, I only want 2 pages, okay? If you have, going back to an old-fashioned metaphor, if you have to staple or use a stapler, then you've written too much. So it should be on either side of 1 sheet of paper in a 20th century sort of way of thinking. It's 1,000 words. Now, you don't have to land exactly on 1,000 words, plus or minus 20% is fine. And then in terms of the golden rule, so here's my advice to you in terms of as a supervisor, these 5 golden rules that I really like. So apart from the specific content of each item, which you're the expert in the field and you'll be able to react to, I think these 5 things sort of hover above that to help give an additional element of guidance. It should be clear and focused and to the point. It should be meaningful. So all the information should be meaningful rather than throwing in some boilerplate, very general motherhood statement, things that really don't help. Make it meaningful. You only have 1,000 words. Make it clear you put in an effort. Okay, so a big sign of a lack of effort is where I find students, it's like they've just discovered copy and paste. And so they're copy and pasting everywhere because they think there's, all these items are just the same, asking the same thing. It should be connected. There should be connectivity. And so you can have situations where individual answers to items in the framework make sense, but when you put them together, they're disconnected and they're confusing. And then the one that rounds it all up for me and links back to the cartoon strip that I used a few slides ago, it should start a conversation. There should be communication, but the goal is not perfection. So don't tell your student that you're supervising to perfect it, because they'll be wasting time. I mean, the nature of research, it's a moving feast. The goalposts move. And when their ideas change and evolve and sort of move, then the definition of perfection, well, it either moves or it's not relevant. So what I say to my students instead, do the best you can, knowing it will not be perfect. If you can start a conversation, and a meaningful conversation with this, you've had success, because that's what you want. You want advice. You want detailed advice from an expert in the field. Now, sometimes I get asked, well, if it's 1,000 words, how would you divide them up? Would you have the same number of words for each element? And well, no, I think we can divvy it up a little bit, so it sort of goes in certain directions. And I won't go, this is suggestive. I'm not saying everyone has to agree with this, but I've found it's quite helpful as a rule of thumb. The one that I would say, if anything, deserves more words than the rest, for me, is motivation. So, I think 200 words, 20% of the budget is quite reasonable there, because the way I think of motivation, if I could just use it to illustrate some more specific guidance I would give, and I don't have time to go in any depth to the others. But for me, I follow the rule of three whenever I can, and I've got a rule of three for motivation. So the first thing I'd like to see from my student that I'm supervising is a statement, or 1 or 2 sentences that tells me the state of play. What do we currently know in the broad field? Remember, hovering a little bit above the project they want to do. State of play for this field intellectually. That's number one. Number two is, with that as the background, where is a major area of uncertainty regarding the current state of knowledge? Now, I don't want to use the word gap. Sometimes people describe it as gap, but I don't like the word gap, because I think people become too gap focused. Then it's like, oh, all I've got to do is find a gap. So I'm not going to use it, even though I've used it 3 times just then. So state of play, where is the deficiency in knowledge that's relevant here? But it's sort of at a hovering. I see students that I supervise want to jump straight to their research and define that. No, go a level above. So that general area of deficiency of knowledge. So what do we know? What don't we know? And then the third part of this rule of three is, why is it important to know or get an answer to that piece where we have a deficiency? What do we know? What don't we know? Why do we need to know? To me, if a student can hit those 3 in their motivation, at 200 words, then they're doing a great job. So we certainly don't have time for any examples. I'm going to point you to where you can see some written examples, but one of my favorite video examples is by Keris Downing. You can view it on YouTube with this link. It's about 10 minutes long, and it's a very good one. I ran a pitching competition at UQ for many years, and Keris was actually the runner-up in 2017. So as an oral pitch and as an oral example of this framework, I think it's really nice. So where can you learn more? Well, if you didn't already know, as a supervisor, this is your go-to. And I apologise to any of you that, and maybe quite a number of you have now accessed this, but this is a great gift I've given you here. I believe it's like what you do in your very first meeting with your students, or if you have got a research process class or something, you ask your students to access this paper, read it, and come to the next class or the next meeting ready to discuss. And that is already kick-starting your role as a supervisor. And it has a lot of detail in there that we haven't had a chance to scratch at in this session. So that is the go-to. Everyone's allowed to be passionate about something that they've created. And for me, this is it. I've published over 350 papers, and if there's only one thing of mine that you ever read, this should be it. Forget about the rest. Everything else I've done is worthless. This is essential for you and your students. And, you know, I would think you're crazy, and I use that with the greatest respect, and I don't want to upset you, but you'd be crazy not to utilize this resource. It's totally free. And it just so happens today was a major milestone, 21,000 downloads. It's 157th in the all-time rank of SSRN downloaded papers. Now it's getting, you know, one has to be a little careful to get too obsessed by this, but I have noticed that, you know, given COVID, there's a bunch of COVID papers, not really business related, they're more the health ones. They've had like 90,000 downloads in a few months or a year. So they just go streaming past. So that's really hard competition in a way to make your mark in terms of penetration. But this is an important metric for me. I don't wish to abuse it, but to me, this symbolizes and signifies, well, it's scratching the surface. There are millions of researchers out there, and I think I can help a lot of them. So, you know, I hope I've encouraged you to use this as supervisors with your students. You could have a look at a masterclass, 48-minute video that goes through in a little bit more detail the pitching research framework. You could ask your students to watch that. There's a 9-minute primer animation that you could also use. So how does this all come together? How does this all come together then for pitching responsible science? And I'm just about finished, so if you could mute, that would be great. But, and it does tie into some of the things I mentioned earlier about responsible science and crisis. And so we have pitching research framework down on the left-hand side, ex post, ex ante version, responsible science, either the credible research or relevant research pillars. And so the intersection of credible research and ex post use of pitching research is a replication pitch. And I encourage students when they're thinking about, or when I ask them to do a replication, to actually pitch it to me first. And I certainly ask that in the Pacific Basin Finance Journal section that I've created. I talked about pre-registration. You could have a pre-registration pitch, which is the intersection of credible research and ex ante, and then an intersection of relevant and ex ante would be what I call an engagement and impact pitch. And I've got a companion paper that looks at this. And if anyone's interested, I can point you to that. I'm pretty much going to wind up now in 60 seconds. The rest of the slides are self-explanatory. So goal 3, helping use the supervisors with other resources that are going to make your life easier. So the one-stop shop for all things pitching is something we've been working hard on. And so click on that or go to that link. You get greeted by your research journey starts here. So imagine your student, you've sent them to this site and you say to them, explore the site. Now we can see across the top, there's an Inspires network, which I'll mention at the very end in about 30 seconds. Events and competitions. We've just run a big global pitching research competition. Many of you might be aware of that. And the resources tab. And it's the resources tab that I would send students to have a look. Now, module 1, responsible science matters. I've given you a flavour of that now, but there's more resources there. Module 2, pitching research matters. I've given you a flavour of that as well. And there are other modules there as well. So module 2, for example, have these different elements. But what I'm very excited to tell you is coming soon, we've been working at Bond University with some colleagues on available entirely free to the world. And that was a bit of a battle to convince my university to make it free. It's a formal version of module 2, and we've structured it so your students, you could send them there and they could do effectively 10 hours of learning content to get a fairly good exposure to the pitching research framework. and it includes formative assessment and quizzes, and they'll end up, if they complete the micro-credential, an official certificate of completion at the end. There's an online library of written examples at this link. And finally, I want to mention to you, for those that don't know, created last year an international society of pitching research for responsible science. I invite you to become a member and your students, because, well, we've just run our pitching competition, but we're working vigorously to develop online resources that will include, not just at the moment, the ability to create a pitch where you have guidance, but also to get feedback. So we're going to have, we're building a feedback element to this, as well as an assessment element. So all of that will be rolled out very soon, we hope, or as soon as we can. So I'm sorry for possibly, I had in my mind 45 minutes, and the timer at the moment is up to 46 and a half. So I thank you very much. I hope you found that interesting and helpful. I'm not entirely sure whether we got time for questions. If we don't have time for questions, that's fine. I can take them via email or whatever. But I'll hand it back to Imran, and I don't want you to blow the time budget for your session. If there is time for questions, I'm happy to. If there's not, that's fine by me as well. Thanks.